Captain Threx Vorn left the floor before any of us understood that the human had moved. 1 second, he was standing in the center of the training hall, all 8 feet of him wrapped in ceremonial combat armor, laughing so hard his throat plates clicked like stones in a dryer. The next second, his boots were hanging 3 feet above the deck, his arms frozen at his sides, and the smallest cadet in the room was holding him up with one hand like he weighed about as much as a gym bag. I remember the silence more than the lift. Silence is rare in a Varkan training hall. We were a loud species. We believed in volume. We believed in weight. We believed that strength announced itself with horns, armor, scars, and the kind of footsteps that made weak creatures step aside before they were asked. Captain Threx had all of that. Emily Carter had none of it. She was 5'6", maybe 130 pounds in Earth measurements, wearing a plain gray exchange uniform that looked like it had been designed by a committee allergic to personality. Pale skin. Brown hair tied back. 2 small hands. No claws. No visible armor. No crest. No secondary limbs. No threat display at all. When she entered the hall that morning, half the room thought she was lost. The other half thought she was equipment support. I thought she was a clerical error with shoes. That was my professional assessment after 17 cycles of evaluating combat species for the Galactic Defense Academy. Then Captain Threx Vorn made the mistake of laughing at Earth's muscles in front of her. To be fair, everyone laughed. The phrase itself sounded ridiculous when the instructor read it from her file. Muscular density above galactic baseline. Grip strength irregular. Skeletal compression tolerance under review. Endurance classification pending. Earthborne adaptation warning. It was the warning that broke us. A warning for that? For a quiet human girl who stood near the entrance with her hands folded behind her back, looking more embarrassed by the attention than afraid of it? One cadet barked a laugh. Another asked if Earth muscles were used for opening stubborn food packages. Someone in the back said humans. Probably counted walking upstairs as resistance training. Emily did not answer. She only looked at the floor for a moment, as if she were reminding herself to be polite in a room full of idiots. That should have concerned me. Confidence makes noise. Fear makes noise. Anger makes noise. Emily Carter made none. Captain Threx stepped forward because captains enjoy teaching lessons, especially the kind that make a crowd admire them. He planted himself in front of her, towering over her by more than 2 feet, his shadow covering her entire body. His armor alone weighed more than she did. He spread his arms and said, loud enough for every cadet and every wall sensor to hear, "This is Earth's muscle? This is the species the Council flagged for physical caution." The room laughed again. Emily blinked once. "Sir," she said, calm as Sunday morning, "do you want a demonstration?" That made it worse. Threx turned toward us with a grin wide enough to show every polished tooth plate. "Yes," he said. "Show us." Then he tapped the center of his chest armor with one heavy finger. "Try to move me." Emily tilted her head. "Not much. Just enough." "Move you where?" she asked. We laughed for the 3rd time. It was the last time. 47 seconds before Captain Threx Vorn learned the difference between confidence and evidence, I was standing beside the instructor platform with Emily Carter's file open on my tablet, wondering how any committee with functioning brains had approved her for advanced physical assessment. The file looked serious. That was the irritating part. Red caution markers. Yellow review tags. 3 separate council notes advising evaluators not to rely on visual classification. Visual classification is half of evaluation. You look at a species and the body tells you what it was built to do. Varkun were built to push through walls. Torvani were built to carry freight up mountains. Gralix were built to climb vertical ice and storms that could peel paint off a starship. Humans looked like they were built to complain about uncomfortable chairs. Emily stood at the edge of the training square while the other cadets formed a loose half-circle around her. She did not fill the room. She did not try to. That made the room hate her faster. Strong species respect display. Weak species use display to pretend. Emily gave us nothing. No puffed chest. No hard stare. No growl. She simply waited, hands relaxed, shoulders level, breathing slow enough that the medical scanner briefly marked her as inactive. I remember tapping the screen twice because I thought the sensor was malfunctioning. It was not. Her heart rate was steady. Too steady. A cadet named Brack leaned toward his friend and muttered that Earth must be a nursery planet with dramatic marketing. A few others laughed. Someone asked whether the council had confused muscle density with emotional sensitivity. Another wondered aloud if Emily needed a lighter gravity setting so she would not get tired standing upright. She heard all of it. I know she heard all of it because her eyes moved toward each speaker exactly once, not sharply, not angrily, just accurately. Like she was placing pins on a map. That bothered me for about half a second, and then my own arrogance buried the warning where it buried most inconvenient facts. The instructor read the next line of her file. Homeworld Earth. Gravity, 1.03 Galactic Standard. Environmental rating, Death World Class 9. The laughter stumbled there. Not stopped. Stumbled. Class 9 meant something. It meant weather with opinions. It meant predators that did not negotiate. It meant bacteria, storms, heat, cold, pressure, and competition all trying to vote a species out of existence. But then everyone looked at Emily again, and the fear evaporated. She looked too ordinary to be a warning label. She looked like somebody's quiet neighbor who returned borrowed tools on time. Captain Threx Vorn arrived late, as usual, because important officers enjoy making rooms adjust around them. The doors opened, his boots struck the deck, and the cadets straightened instantly. Threx was a monument to everything my species admired. Tall. Broad. Heavy. Decorated. His armor carried the silver marks of command across the chest plates, and his presence alone changed the air. He glanced at Emily, then at the file in my hand, then back at Emily, and his mouth curved into that terrible smile officers use when they think the universe has handed them a joke. That is the human? He asked. Nobody answered because everyone already knew what kind of answer he wanted. Emily did not salute too fast. She did not shrink. She gave him the exact required respect and nothing extra. That made him smile wider. I was told Earth produced dangerous bodies, he said, turning so the whole room could enjoy it. But this one looks like she was assembled for office work. The cadets laughed again, louder this time, relieved that the captain had given them permission. I laughed too. I wish I could say I did not. I wish I had been wiser, kinder, more professional. I was not. I looked at the calm human girl in the gray uniform and saw a mistake. Then Threx stepped into the square and decided to prove it in public. The room that hated Emily Carter was not unusual by Academy standards. That was the worst part. Every advanced physical assessment began the same way. A new species arrived. The strong ones made themselves larger. The clever ones made themselves useful. The nervous ones tried to disappear into the walls. The room noticed everything and forgave nothing. Training Hall 7 was built like a bull, with black composite flooring, gravity anchors under every plate, and observation glass high above us where officers could pretend they were studying technique instead of enjoying embarrassment. 28 cadets stood around the central square, representing 12 species and at least 40 different ways to look dangerous. Brack had shoulder plates thick enough to stop construction debris. The Torvani twins had 4 arms each and moved with the bored confidence of creatures who had never needed to ask for help opening anything. A Gralix cadet crouched near the edge of the mat, talons clicking softly against the floor, her eyes reflecting the overhead lights in silver flashes. Compared to them, Emily looked almost unfinished. That was what my mind kept returning to. She had no obvious defensive biology. Her skin looked too exposed. Her bones did not announce themselves. Her hands seemed useful for holding cups, not surviving combat evaluation. The uniform did not help. The gray Academy exchange suit flattened everyone into the same basic shape, but on Emily it looked less like training gear and more like something a substitute teacher might wear on a field trip. Still, she stood in the center of all that attention without shifting her weight. That detail should have mattered. It did not, because we had already decided what she was. The room makes a decision fast. Once it decides you are weak, every breath you take becomes evidence. Emily blinked slowly, and someone whispered that she was scared. Emily looked at the gravity anchors, and someone said she was confused by real equipment. Emily flexed her fingers once, barely once, and Brack snorted. Careful! She might sprain something. Laughter rolled around the hall. It bounced off the armor racks and the observation glass. It filled the space until even the ceiling drones seemed to hum with it. Emily let it happen. No correction. No protest. No brave little speech about respect or misunderstanding. She simply stood there, pale face calm, brown eyes moving from cadet to cadet with an expression I could not name yet. At the time, I thought it was restraint born from fear. Later, I would understand it was patience. There is a difference. Fear waits for permission to run. Patience waits for stupidity to finish talking. Captain Threx Vaughn walked a slow circle around her, each step heavy enough to make the floor sensors glow under his boots. He enjoyed the performance. Of course he did. He had an audience, a reputation, and a human in front of him who appeared to prove every comfortable theory we had about Earth. Look at the posture, Threx said, gesturing toward her like she was an exhibit behind glass. Balanced, yes. Disciplined, maybe. But there is no mass behind it. No natural leverage. No intimidation profile. Emily turned her head slightly as he circled behind her, tracking him without moving her feet. The motion was so small most of the cadets missed it. I did not. My tablet did not either. A tiny line flashed across the corner of the screen. Predictive response spike. I frowned at it. The system had noticed something. In her muscles, some small preparation below the surface. Then the line vanished, and I dismissed it because arrogance is very efficient when it wants to be. Threx stopped in front of her again, and leaned down just enough to be insulting. Tell me, Cadet Carter, on your world, are you considered strong? The room leaned in. Emily looked up at him. Her voice stayed soft. Not especially, sir. The laughter came back instantly. Louder. Meaner. Relieved. That answer confirmed everything they wanted to believe. Not especially. The human had admitted it herself. Even I felt my shoulders loosen. Then Emily added, almost like an afterthought. Back home, my older brother wins most of the arm wrestling. The laughter weakened by one small degree. Not much. Just enough for me to hear the floor sensors under her boots begin to recalibrate. The file on Emily Carter should have ended the laughter before it started. It did not, because none of us wanted information. We wanted confirmation. We wanted the human to be small, so every detail that said otherwise became a clerical inconvenience. My tablet kept trying to warn me. Bone density above species expectation. Fast twitch response elevated. Grip pressure records incomplete due to equipment failure during intake. Equipment failure. That phrase appeared 3 times in her file, and somehow I still treated it like bad maintenance instead of a pattern. The Academy database listed Earth as a Class 9 death world, but the number felt ridiculous beside her name. Earth had blue oceans, white clouds, forest cities, music, weather reports. Humans sent cheerful diplomatic videos with smiling faces and coffee mugs. Death World species were supposed to look like Captain Threx Vaughn. They were supposed to come with armor, tusks, poison sacs, heat vents, something obvious enough for survival instincts to recognize. Emily Carter looked like she would apologize if someone stepped on her foot. That was the trap. The file said Earth gravity was only slightly above galactic standard, but it also noted that humans spent their lives constantly working against it, from the moment they learned to stand. Their muscles were not ceremonial. They were not display structures. They were utility systems wrapped around stubborn bones, trained by stairs, sports, labor, accidents, weather, and the simple daily insult of living on a planet that never turned the difficulty down. I read those lines and still missed the meaning. So did everyone else. Brack raised one heavy arm and said, "Maybe Earth measures strength differently. Maybe lifting a sandwich counts." The cadets laughed again. Emily glanced at him, not offended, almost curious. That made him bolder. "What do humans lift, Carter? Small pets? Grocery bags? Feelings?" A few cadets repeated the last word like it was clever. Emily gave a tiny shrug. "Furniture sometimes. Engines if someone has a truck. Hay bales if you grow up near a farm." The translation matrix handled the words, but not the cultural weight behind them. To us, she had listed random chores. To her, maybe she had listed childhood. Captain Threx turned toward the class and spread both arms, inviting the room to enjoy the lesson. "There it is. Their great training tradition. Moving furniture." More laughter. I remember Emily's fingers then. Not because they flexed. Because they stopped flexing. Her right hand became perfectly still at her side, relaxed but ready in a way I did not know how to read. The floor sensors under her boots brightened again. Recalibration complete. Load distribution abnormal. I lowered my tablet, suddenly annoyed by the data. It kept interrupting a perfectly simple humiliation. The instructor on duty, Marshal Vey, cleared his throat from the platform. He was older than Threx, less theatrical, and smart enough to distrust easy rooms. "Captain, this is a controlled assessment," he said. "We are here to evaluate, not entertain." Threx smiled without looking away from Emily. "Evaluation requires demonstration." Then he leaned down, his voice dropping into that public whisper officers use when they want cruelty to sound like mentorship. "Cadet Carter, since your people are so proud of practical strength, show this class something practical." Emily looked from Threx to Marshal Vey, then to me, then back to Threx. "What would you like me to move, sir?" she asked. That should have been the moment we chose a crate, a weighted bar, a training sled, anything built to be lifted. Instead, Threx chose pride. He tapped his own chest armor with 2 fingers. The sound rang through the hall. "Me," he said. "Move me 1 inch." The room loved it. Cadets shifted closer. Observation officers behind the glass leaned forward. Even the ceiling drones adjusted their lenses. Emily looked at the captain's boots, then at the glowing sensors beneath them, then at the armor locks across his chest. Her expression did not change. 1 inch, she repeated. "Yes," Threx said, laughing under his breath. "If that is not too ambitious for Earth." Emily nodded once. "Understood, sir." And for the first time since she entered Training Hall 7, the human smiled. Emily Carter's smile was not large enough to be disrespectful. That made it worse. A big smile can be dismissed as arrogance. A nervous smile can be dismissed as fear. Hers was neither. It was the small, polite expression of someone who had just been given a task easier than expected and was trying very hard not to embarrass the person who assigned it. Captain Threx Vorn did not recognize that. None of us did. He rolled his shoulders, letting the armor plates along his chest and back lock into reinforced position with a sound like metal doors sealing. The crowd approved with low murmurs. Threx was turning the moment into ceremony. Varkan loves ceremony, especially when it makes someone else look smaller. He planted his boots wider on the mat, knees bent, center of mass lowered, tail braced behind him for balance. It was a perfect defensive stance. I had seen that stance hold against charging freight drones. I had seen cadets bounce off it and land on padded floors with their pride leaking out through their eyes. Threx weighed 640 pounds without armor. With command plating, gravity stabilizers, and ceremonial mass bands, the floor registered him at just over 900 pounds. He knew it. We knew it. Emily probably knew it too, because the sensor board displayed the number in bright blue above his head. 912 pounds. Someone whistled. Brack leaned toward the Torvani twins and said, "Maybe she can move him emotionally." That got another laugh, but not as strong as before. The room had begun watching Emily too closely to laugh properly. She stepped forward. One step. Not dramatic. Not hesitant. Her boot made almost no sound compared to Threx. She stopped less than 2 feet from him and looked up at the chest plate he had tapped. "Permission to make contact, sir?" she asked. Polite. Professional. Terrible. Threx laughed through his nose. "Granted." Emily lifted her right hand. Small hand? Human hand. 5 fingers, short nails, no claws, no gripping pads we could see. She placed her palm against the center of his armor with the care of someone checking whether a door was warm. Nothing happened. For one long second, the universe remained sensible. Threx stood there smiling. The cadets leaned in. I glanced at my tablet and saw 6 warnings appear at once. Muscle recruitment spike. Ground pressure increase. Balance shift detected. Internal force estimate unavailable. Unavailable was not a word Academy sensors used often. I opened my mouth to say something. I do not know what. Maybe stop. Maybe wait. Maybe why is the human still breathing so calmly? Emily bent her knees a fraction of an inch. Not enough to look like effort. Enough to make the floor beneath her boots brighten from blue to white. Threx's smile twitched. It was tiny. Almost invisible. But I saw it. His body had noticed something before his pride did. Emily asked. 1 inch, correct? Threx's eyes narrowed. If you can manage it. She nodded. Yes, sir. Then she pushed. Not with a shout. Not with a heroic strain. Her shoulder did not shake. Her face did not twist. She simply applied pressure, and Captain Threx Vorn, decorated commander of the Varkan Heavy Infantry, slid backward exactly 1 inch. The room went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence that makes machines sound guilty. The sensor board flashed red, recalculated, then flashed red again. Threx stared down at the space between his boots and the floor marks behind him. 1 inch. Perfect. Measured. Controlled. Emily removed her hand and stepped back. Assessment complete? She asked. Nobody answered. Because every cadet in that hall had just learned the most frightening thing about Emily Carter. She had not been trying. Captain Threx Vorn should have laughed it off. That would have saved him. 1 inch was small enough to dismiss if Pride had not been standing in the room with 28 witnesses and 3 ceiling drones recording from different angles. He could have said the floor was slick. He could have said he allowed it for instructional purposes. He could have said the human had surprised him, and a good officer respected surprise. Instead, he looked at the exact 1 inch gap between his boots and the alignment marks, and his throat plates clicked once. Not amusement. Irritation. The room heard it. Emily heard it too. She stood where she had stepped back, hands at her sides, face calm, waiting for an answer to her question. Assessment complete. That was all she wanted to know. Not applause. Not victory. Not respect. Just whether the task was finished. For some reason, that made Threx angrier than a boast would have. Again, he said. Marshal Vase straightened on the instructor platform. Captain, the cadet completed the stated objective. Again, Threx repeated louder. The word rolled across the hall and pressed every cadet into stillness. He turned his head toward the sensor board, where the red warning still pulsed beside the neat little measurement. 1 inch. The floor anchors shifted. The armor stabilizers adjusted late. There was a calibration error. I looked at my tablet. There had been no calibration error. If anything, the systems were now overcompensating because they did not want to admit what had just happened. Emily did not argue. That was the second thing I began to fear about her. She never wasted energy defending the obvious. Threx stepped back to his original mark and locked his boots into the magnetic traction grid. The floor gave a low tone as the anchors engaged. His armor settled, mass bands brightening along the ribs and shoulders. The sensor board updated. 912 pounds became 986. Then 1020. Then 1043. Brack stopped smiling. The Torvani twins exchanged a glance. Even the Gralix cadet lowered her head slightly, the way predators do when they stop playing and start measuring distance. Threx spread his arms again. There, he said. No drift. No loose footing. No generous interpretation. He looked down at Emily with the cold satisfaction of a commander closing a trap. Move me now. Emily studied the glowing anchors under his boots. Sir, those are locked. Correct. And your armor has increased its effective weight. Correct. She paused. Is that allowed in the assessment? Threx smiled. Are you objecting? Emily shook her head once. No, sir. I am clarifying the task. Something in her voice made my fingers tighten around the tablet. Not fear. Not challenge. Procedure. Like she was asking whether a package should be placed on the porch or inside the garage. Threx leaned forward. The task is simple, Cadet Carter. You will attempt to move me. You will fail. The class will learn that council warnings are not substitutes for real strength. Emily looked past him toward Marshal Vey. The old instructor's eyes were narrowed now, and for the first time that morning, he did not look amused. Cadet, he said carefully, you are not required to continue if you believe the conditions are unreasonable. Every alien in the hall understood that as mercy. Emily seemed to understand it as permission to be honest. They are unreasonable, Marshal, she said. A few cadets exhaled, relieved. Then she added, but not difficult. The room changed temperature. I cannot prove that scientifically, but every living thing in Training Hall 7 felt it. Threx's smile vanished. Emily stepped forward again. Same small step. Same quiet boots. This time she did not place her palm flat on his chest. She looked at the armor locks, chose one reinforced ridge near the center plate, and curled her fingers around it with careful precision. The sensor board flashed yellow before she even pulled. Grip pressure rising. Threx glanced down. Just once. Emily looked up at him and asked politely, Move you or lift you? Nobody laughed. For one full second, Captain Threx Vorn did not answer because his brain was still. Living in the old universe, the one where humans asked questions because they were confused. Then he made the sound that ruined him. He scoffed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a short breath through his throat plates, sharp enough for the front row to hear. Lift me, he said, and the words carried the kind of confidence that belongs in museums next to extinct ideas. Emily nodded once. Yes, sir. That was all. No speech. No warning. No flexing for the crowd. She adjusted her grip on the ridge of his chest armor by less than half an inch, set her left hand behind her back as if to keep it out of the way, and lowered her center of gravity with the smallest bend of her knees. The floor noticed before we did. The panels under her boots changed from white to amber, then from amber to red. The gravity anchors beneath Threx screamed a warning tone, not because they had failed, but because they were being asked a question they had never been designed to answer. The sensor board flashed. Traction load exceeded. Then, mass compensation unstable. Then, external mechanical assist suspected. There was no mechanical assist. There was only Emily Carter, 5 feet 6 inches tall, one hand on a captain who had turned himself into a 1,000-pound monument to bad judgment. Threx's smile came back for half a heartbeat, like pride trying one last time to remain employed. Then his boots moved. Not backward. Not sideways. Up. The magnetic locks fought for him. The floor anchors pulled. His armor stabilizers growled with blue light, trying to keep him connected to the deck. Emily lifted anyway. It was not fast. That made it worse. A fast motion could be called momentum. A sudden jerk could be blamed on surprise. This was smooth. Controlled. Quiet. Captain Threx Vorn rose from the training mat like the laws of physics had read the room and decided to change teams. 1 inch. 3 inches. 6. His boots cleared the glowing floor anchors, and the tone cut out because the system no longer understood what it was measuring. The cadets did not breathe. I am not exaggerating for effect. 28 combat cadets, 12 species, hundreds of pounds of armor and pride, and not one of them made a sound. Threx stared down at Emily. Emily looked up at Threx. Her expression remained politely focused, like she was holding a heavy suitcase for someone at an airport. At 12 inches off the floor, the captain's tail lifted too. At 18, his arms slowly stopped spreading and tucked closer to his body, not in fear exactly, but in the sudden awareness that dignity becomes difficult when your boots cannot find ground. At 2 feet, Brack took one step back. At 3 feet, Marshal Vey whispered something in his own language that the translator refused to touch. My tablet shut itself down. Not powered off. Not damaged. It simply went black, as if the device had decided it wanted no part in recording the impossible. Emily's breathing was still even. That was what finally got to me. Not the lift. Not the alarms. Not Threx hanging in the air with his command armor glowing uselessly. Her breathing. She was not straining. Her arm was steady. Her shoulders were calm. Her face had the mild concentration of someone pouring coffee without spilling it. Then she turned her head slightly toward Marshal Vey and asked, "Is this high enough for the assessment?" Nobody answered. Captain Threx's eyes moved from Emily's hand to the floor beneath him, then to the cadets watching him float above the mat. The old universe cracked right there. I heard it in the silence. Emily Carter had not defeated him. She had corrected our math. The first alarm did not sound like panic. It sounded embarrassed. A single clean tone came from the wall system, polite and professional, the kind of warning a training hall gives when a cadet stands too close to a moving platform. Then Emily Carter lifted Captain Threx Vorn another inch, and the polite tone became 7 different alarms disagreeing with each other at once. Weight sensors rejected their own readings. Gravity anchors cycled through emergency diagnostics. The overhead drones spun in place, lost their tracking locks, recovered them, and then lost them again because the center of the room contained a physical contradiction wearing a gray exchange uniform. The main board above the mat flashed external mechanical assist suspected. For the 3rd time, Marshal Vey finally found his voice. Scan for equipment. 2 wall scanners swept over Emily in blue light. Nothing. No lifting rig. No powered frame. No hidden field generator. No illegal gravity tool. Just a human hand curled around Varkan command armor and a calm face beneath a lifted captain. The system did not like that answer. It scanned again. Still nothing. Emily glanced at the board, read the warning, and looked almost apologetic. I am not using equipment, she said. It was the most unnecessary sentence ever spoken in Training Hall 7, and somehow the most terrifying. Threx tried to adjust his posture in the air. It was a small movement, more instinct than strategy. His armor shifted, his tail balanced, and the mass bands along his shoulders brightened, trying to redistribute weight back toward the floor. The floor was no longer involved. Emily compensated without looking at him. Her wrist turned a few degrees. The captain steadied. That was when Brack sat down. He did not fall. He did not faint. He simply lowered himself onto the edge of the mat like his legs had filed a complaint with management, and quit. The Torvani twins moved apart, giving the human more room than physics required. The Gralix cadet folded her talons against her palms and stopped clicking them. All around the half-circle, the cadets were doing the same calculation in different bodies. If she could lift him like that, what else had we misunderstood? I looked toward the observation glass. The officers above us had stopped pretending to be casual. One had both hands pressed against the railing. Another was recording manually, as if the official system could not be trusted to tell the truth. Behind them, a junior analyst mouthed the words "no way" without making a sound. I agreed with him completely. No way was a reasonable response. It was also wrong. Emily still had one hand behind her back. That detail spread through the room slower than the alarms but hit harder when it arrived. One hand. Not a two-arm lift. Not a full-body strain. Not a desperate effort held for half a second. One hand, steady, controlled, patient. She could have made it look impressive if she wanted. She could have grunted, braced, turned red, made the rest of us feel safer by showing effort. She did not give us that comfort. She just stood there, boots planted on the mat, holding a decorated Varkan captain in the air while our best technology tried to invent a less humiliating explanation. Threx's voice came out lower than before. "Put me down." No command thunder. No performance. Just the first honest sentence he had spoken all morning. Emily looked to Marshal Vey, not to Threx. That mattered. She still followed the chain of instruction. She still treated the assessment like a class exercise, even while the entire class rearranged its understanding of strength around her. Marshal Vey swallowed once. His throat crest lifted, then settled. "Cadet Carter," he said carefully. "Place the captain down." Emily nodded. "Yes, Marshal." Then she paused and asked the question that ended the last piece of our arrogance. "Gently?" Nobody laughed. Nobody breathed wrong. Marshal Vey closed his eyes for half a second, opened them, and said, "Yes." Gently. Emily lowered Captain Threx Vorn back to the mat with the care of someone setting down a sleeping child. His boots touched the floor. The anchors reconnected. The alarm stopped. The silence stayed. The silence after Emily Carter set Captain Threx Vorn down was not empty. It was full of calculations dying. You could feel them collapsing one by one across the training hall. Size equals strength. Armor equals dominance. Volume equals confidence. Earth equals primitive. Human equals fragile. Every simple rule we had trusted for generations stood there for a moment, looked at Emily's calm face, and quietly resigned. Threx did not move at first. His boots were back on the mat. His armor was still locked. His mass band still glowed along his shoulders, trying to preserve the dignity of a system that had just been carried through the air by one human hand. He looked down at the floor, then at the armor ridge where Emily had gripped him. There was no damage. That almost made it worse. Damage would have given him something to point at. A dent, a crack, a failure in the material. But the armor was fine. The floor was fine. The anchors were fine. The only thing broken was certainty. Emily stepped back to the exact position she had held before the demonstration, hands resting at her sides, posture straight, breathing unchanged. "Do you need anything else, Marshal?" she asked. Marshal Vey stared at her for 2 full seconds before answering. 2 seconds is a long time in a military training hall. Long enough for every cadet to realize the oldest instructor in the room was choosing his words with the care usually reserved for active explosives and visiting diplomats. "No," he said at last. "That will be sufficient." Sufficient. The word landed softly, but everyone understood what it meant. The assessment was over because the room had no safe category left to put her in. Brack was still sitting on the edge of the mat. He slowly stood, then seemed to regret becoming tall again and took another step back. The Torvani twins avoided looking at each other. The Gralix cadet finally spoke, her voice low and careful. "Was that normal for humans?" No one laughed. That question had become important. Terribly important. Emily looked toward her as if considering the honest answer. "For trained humans?" she said. "It depends." That was not comforting. It depended. On what? On training? On age? On mood? On whether breakfast had been good? My mind tried to picture a planet full of creatures like her casually moving heavy things, carrying furniture upstairs, lifting engines in garages, dragging equipment through mud, treating labor as a weekend inconvenience instead of a battlefield achievement. Suddenly, Earth did not look soft in my imagination. It looked heavy. Heavy air. Heavy gravity. Heavy tools. Heavy weather. Heavy expectations. A world that taught its children to push, pull, carry, climb, endure, and then call it normal. I looked down at my tablet. It had restarted on its own. Emily's file blinked back onto the screen, still wearing all those warnings I had ignored. I selected the threat classification field. Low physical concern. That was what Intake had written. Low physical concern, based on visual profile. My finger hovered over the edit command. Across the mat, Captain Threx. Vorn finally lifted his eyes to Emily. The captain, who had entered like a walking monument, now looked at her the way sailors look at deep water after the map runs out. Not humiliated. Not angry. A little afraid, yes, but mostly awake. "Cadet Carter," he said, and for the first time, there was no mockery in his voice. "Why did you ask if you should put me down gently?" Emily blinked, surprised by the question. "Because dropping people is rude, sir." That was when Marshal Vey sat down on the instructor platform, very slowly, as if his legs had just received the same news as the rest of us. The human had not been showing dominance. She had been showing manners. I changed the classification on her file before anyone told me to. Not to dangerous. Not to hostile. Those words were too small and too simple. I wrote, "Earth-born physical standards require complete reevaluation." Then I added a second line, because some warnings need to be understood by idiots like me. Do not laugh until you know what humans consider normal.